What if the reason you struggle with productivity isn't lack of systems, tools, or discipline, but because you've been training your inner voice to operate like a demanding taskmaster rather than a wise collaborator? Recent breakthroughs in cognitive psychology suggest that extreme productivity emerges not from better external organization but from fundamentally different patterns of self-communication. The underground world of extreme productivity operates according to principles that rarely surface in mainstream discussions about getting things done. While popular productivity culture focuses on external systems, apps, methodologies, time management techniques, individuals who consistently produce extraordinary results have discovered something far more fundamental. The quality of your internal dialogue determines the quality of your output more than any external system ever could. This revelation emerges from studying what cognitive scientists call high-performance outliers, individuals whose productivity levels seem to defy normal human limitations. These aren't people working longer hours or using superior tools. Instead, they've developed what researchers term generative self-talk patterns, internal dialogue styles that actually create energy and momentum rather than depleting it through constant self-monitoring and judgment. The conventional approach to productivity improvement focuses on controlling behavior through external structure and willpower. You create detailed schedules, implement complex systems, and attempt to force compliance through self-discipline. But this approach fundamentally misunderstands how human motivation and sustained action actually work. It treats the mind like a machine that responds predictably to inputs rather than recognizing it as a dynamic system where internal narrative patterns determine external performance outcomes. True productivity mastery requires understanding that your relationship with tasks, deadlines, and goals is mediated entirely through the ongoing conversation you maintain with yourself about work, worth, and capability. When this internal dialogue operates from principles of curiosity rather than anxiety, support rather than criticism, and trust rather than doubt, productivity becomes not just more effective but genuinely sustainable and fulfilling. What distinguishes extraordinary producers from chronic strugglers isn't their relationship with external systems but their relationship with the concept of productivity itself. Most people approach productivity from what philosophers call deficiency motivation, the assumption that current performance is inadequate and must be improved through better control, organization, or efficiency. This mindset generates internal dialogue patterns focused on inadequacy, comparison, and constant self-evaluation. Extreme producers operate from what psychologists term growth motivation, the recognition that productivity emerges naturally from aligned engagement with meaningful work rather than from imposed external structure. This fundamental shift creates entirely different patterns of self-talk. Instead of, "I should be doing more," or "I'm not organized enough," their internal dialogue sounds more like, "What wants to emerge through my work today?" Or, "How can I create conditions that support my natural creativity and focus?" Dr. Andreas Peterson, who leads the Copenhagen Productivity Research Collective, has identified what he calls the productivity paradox principle. Individuals who achieve the highest levels of sustained output consistently report that they stopped trying to be productive in conventional terms. Instead, they developed what he describes as collaborative self-dialogue, internal conversations that treat productivity challenges as interesting problems to explore rather than personal failures to overcome. This approach recognizes a fundamental truth about human psychology that mainstream productivity culture consistently ignores. Forced action creates resistance, while invited action creates flow. When your internal dialogue operates like a harsh supervisor demanding performance, it generates psychological reactance, the mind's natural tendency to resist external control, even when that control comes from yourself. When your self-talk functions more like a trusted collaborator exploring possibilities, it activates intrinsic motivation systems that can sustain high performance levels indefinitely. The underground nature of these insights stems partly from their counterintuitive quality. Our culture deeply values visible effort, systematic organization, and quantifiable results. The idea that extraordinary productivity might emerge from gentler, more intuitive approaches challenges fundamental assumptions about human nature and achievement. Yet the evidence consistently demonstrates that sustainable high performance requires working with rather than against your natural psychological patterns. David Kim, a software architect in Vancouver, spent years trapped in what he describes as productivity hell, constantly implementing new systems, tracking metrics, and optimizing workflows while experiencing steadily declining actual output. His internal dialogue had become dominated by what cognitive scientists call performance anxiety loops, repetitive self-talk patterns focused on measuring, comparing, and criticizing his productive capacity rather than engaging with the work itself. The breakthrough occurred when David began questioning not his productivity systems but the fundamental assumptions underlying his relationship with work. Instead of asking, "How can I get more done?" he started exploring, "What kind of internal environment allows my best work to emerge naturally?" This shift in questioning led to a complete transformation of his self-talk patterns and, consequently, his productive capacity. David discovered that his most productive periods historically occurred when he wasn't trying to be productive at all. Moments when he became so absorbed in interesting problems that time seemed to disappear. These flow states shared a common characteristic. His internal dialogue focused on the work itself rather than on his performance of the work. Instead of thoughts like, "I need to finish this quickly," or "This isn't good enough," his mind engaged in conversations about technical challenges, creative possibilities, and elegant solutions. Rather than attempting to recreate these states through external manipulation, David learned to cultivate the internal dialogue patterns that naturally supported them. This involved developing what he calls process curiosity, a form of self-talk that treats each work session as an experiment in discovering what approaches, timing, and mental attitudes produce the most satisfying and effective results. The transformation wasn't immediate, but within several months, David's output had increased dramatically while his stress levels decreased proportionally. More importantly, the quality of his work improved significantly because his attention was focused on craft and problem-solving rather than on self-evaluation and time management. He had discovered what researchers call intrinsically motivated productivity, high performance that emerges from genuine engagement rather than external pressure. What makes David's case particularly instructive is how his approach addressed the root cause of productivity struggles, the adversarial relationship most people develop with their own work processes. When your internal dialogue treats productivity as something you must achieve rather than something you naturally express when conditions are right, you create psychological resistance that undermines the very outcomes you're attempting to create. Recent neuroimaging studies conducted at the Institute for Advanced Productivity Research have revealed something remarkable about the brain patterns of individuals who maintain high output levels over extended periods. Rather than showing increased activity in regions associated with willpower and self-control, these high performers demonstrate enhanced connectivity between areas responsible for intrinsic motivation, creative problem-solving, and what neuroscientists call effortless attention. Dr. Catherine Zhou's groundbreaking research on productivity neuroplasticity shows that individuals who engage in supportive self-talk about their work develop stronger neural pathways in the brain's reward processing centers while simultaneously reducing activity in regions associated with stress response and performance anxiety. This neurological shift creates what she terms sustainable motivation architecture, brain patterns that naturally support consistent high performance without the psychological burnout typically associated with intensive productivity efforts. The underground nature of these findings becomes clear when we examine how they contradict conventional wisdom about achievement and effort. Mainstream productivity culture assumes that higher output requires greater exertion of willpower and more sophisticated external controls. But the neuroscience reveals that sustainable productivity emerges from reducing internal friction rather than increasing external pressure. This principle operates through what cognitive scientists call motivational coherence, the alignment between conscious goals and subconscious desires. When your internal dialogue about work emphasizes curiosity, growth, and contribution rather than obligation, competition, and evaluation, your brain's natural reward systems activate in support of productive activity. Work begins to feel intrinsically satisfying rather than externally imposed. Consider how this plays out in practical terms. When approaching a challenging project, most people generate internal dialogue focused on difficulty, time pressure, and potential failure. This is going to be hard. I don't have enough time. What if it doesn't turn out well? This self-talk activates stress response systems that actually impair the cognitive functions needed for complex work, creativity, problem-solving, and sustained attention. The underground approach involves what researchers call collaborative task engagement. Your internal dialogue sounds more like, "I wonder what interesting challenges this project will reveal. I'm curious to discover what I'll learn through this process," or "I trust my ability to work through whatever difficulties arise." This seemingly subtle shift activates entirely different neural networks, those associated with exploration, growth, and intrinsic satisfaction. The result is what extreme producers describe as effortless intensity, the ability to maintain high levels of focused engagement without the psychological strain typically associated with demanding work. The first underground principle involves intention archaeology, the practice of examining the deeper motivations underlying your productivity goals through compassionate internal dialogue. Before beginning any work session, spend a few minutes exploring not just what you want to accomplish but why it matters to you. This might involve internal questions like, "What aspects of this work genuinely interest me?" Or, "How does completing this project align with what I value most?" This approach transforms productivity from external obligation into internal alignment, naturally generating the motivation needed for sustained high performance. The second strategy centers on what researchers call process celebration, developing internal dialogue patterns that acknowledge and appreciate your engagement with work rather than focusing solely on outcomes. Instead of self-talk like, "I need to finish this by 5 o'clock, you cultivate thoughts like, "I'm enjoying the problem-solving aspects of this challenge," or "I appreciate how focused I've been for the past hour." This shift activates reward systems in the brain that support continued engagement rather than creating anxiety about results. The third underground approach involves productive confusion tolerance, learning to engage with uncertainty and difficulty through curious rather than anxious self-talk. When encountering challenging aspects of projects, instead of generating stress-inducing thoughts like, "I don't know how to do this," or "This is too complicated." You develop internal responses like, "This complexity is showing me where I have opportunities to grow," or "I wonder what approaches might work here." This reframing transforms obstacles from threats into interesting puzzles, maintaining motivation even during difficult phases of work. The fourth strategy focuses on energy-based scheduling, using internal dialogue to tune into your natural rhythms and preferences rather than imposing arbitrary external structure. This involves regularly checking in with yourself about what type of work feels most aligned with your current mental state and energy levels. Your self-talk becomes more like, "What kind of work would feel satisfying right now?" rather than, "What should I be doing according to my schedule?" This approach leverages your natural motivation patterns rather than fighting against them. The fifth underground principle involves collaborative self-coaching, developing internal dialogue that treats productivity challenges as opportunities for creative problem-solving rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. When facing procrastination, overwhelm, or confusion, instead of critical self-judgment, you engage in supportive internal exploration. What might be causing this resistance? And how can I work with it skillfully? Or, what would make this work more enjoyable and sustainable? This approach addresses underlying causes of productivity struggles rather than just managing symptoms. These strategies share a common characteristic. They work with your natural psychological patterns rather than attempting to override them through willpower and external control. They recognize that sustainable productivity emerges from internal alignment rather than external coercion. The underground nature of these productivity principles reflects a broader cultural shift happening beneath the surface of mainstream achievement culture. While popular discourse continues to focus on optimization, efficiency, and external systems, a growing community of researchers and practitioners has discovered that extraordinary productivity emerges from fundamentally different relationships with work, time, and human capacity. This underground movement recognizes something that conventional productivity culture systematically ignores. Human beings are not machines that respond predictably to inputs and controls. We are complex systems where internal states, beliefs, and dialogue patterns determine external performance more than any external methodology ever could. When you align your approach to productivity with these deeper psychological realities, you gain access to levels of sustained high performance that seem impossible from the perspective of willpower-based approaches. What makes these insights particularly powerful is their accessibility. You don't need expensive tools, complex systems, or dramatic lifestyle changes to begin implementing underground productivity principles. The transformation begins the moment you start paying attention to the quality of your internal dialogue about work and consciously cultivating self-talk patterns that support rather than undermine your natural capacity for focused, meaningful engagement. The research consistently demonstrates that individuals who master these internal approaches don't just become more productive, they report higher levels of satisfaction with their work, reduced stress around deadlines and challenges, and increased confidence in their ability to handle complex projects. These benefits emerge naturally from treating yourself as a creative collaborator rather than a productivity machine that needs to be optimized and controlled. As you begin experimenting with these underground approaches, remember that the goal isn't to replace all external systems but to ensure that any productivity methods you use support rather than conflict with your natural psychological patterns. The most effective external systems are those that amplify and support healthy internal dialogue rather than trying to substitute for it through complex controls and monitoring. Perhaps most importantly, Recognize that developing mastery over your internal productivity dialogue is itself a form of productivity. Every moment you spend cultivating supportive, curious, growth-oriented self-talk about your work is directly contributing to your long-term capacity for sustained high performance and professional satisfaction. The underground revolution in productivity begins with the recognition that you already possess all the resources needed for extraordinary output. The question isn't how to acquire new capabilities but how to create internal conditions that allow your natural productivity to flourish without resistance or burnout. Thank you for exploring these underground productivity principles with me. If you're ready to continue this journey into transforming your relationship with work through conscious self-dialogue, please subscribe for more research-backed strategies and deeper explorations into the fascinating intersection of consciousness, productivity, and human potential.